How you guys doing out there? What are you guys here to listen to? Shrimp? So I always think this is fun. Well, first of all, how many people here are actually from Texas? How do you guys do it? Like, literally, if you're dying, like, think how I feel. I came from like 78 degrees, pretty nice. No, that's like, I'm dying. I need my AC at like 66 inside. But like, I'm sitting over there and I'm like, guys, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. I don't know how I'm gonna give a talk feeling this hot. So I'm gonna do the best I can, but it is hot in Dallas. I remember when I first got here, I walked out of the airport and I'm just like, I feel like I'm in a furnace. Yeah, so it's bad. So kudos to you guys for choosing to live in such a hot state. But anyway, I think this is another fun question that I always ask is how many here have actually kept shrimp before? Okay, so I want to tell you guys just a really fun story and then we'll get right into it. I'll try to get through everything, but it's always a lot of information. I used to do these talks and I would go to like fish clubs and I can't even tell you how many times I showed up and they're like, you're teaching us how to breed shrimp to feed our fish, right? And I'm just like, no. And I'm like, does anyone here actually keep shrimp? And they didn't even know what a cherry shrimp was at the time. So we've come a long way. I think maybe like 50, 60 people in here have actually kept shrimp before. So we can talk about whatever, but I tried to gauge my talk off of setting up an aquarium for shrimp and kind of talk through like what I would do, the process that I would go through. And so you guys can just get to know probably what I would do and you can implement that into your own hobby and just go from there. But if you guys have any questions, like, is the top always going to be cut off? Or is that? It was like that? Oh, well, hopefully most of it you'll be able to see. But, okay, so I used to have a picture of me and my wife here, but I just had a baby. And I always used to laugh at those parents that like would post pictures of their kids all the time or, you know, make them their profile picture. And then I became a dad and I'm just like, my God, like how is that not just the cutest little baby in the whole world? So that's my little Maisie Grace. Again, another little backstory and then I'll get into the talk is me and my wife tried for like 4 years to have a baby. And eventually we had that little nugget and she is just the cutest thing in the world. So yeah, so it's amazing. And so my wife actually sent that to me yesterday and I was just like, man, I miss that little baby so much. But I'm happy to be here with you all. Again, thank you to Aquashella for giving me the opportunity to be up here. It's always a pleasure to be able to share my passion with you all. And thank you all for coming out to talk and hear about what I have to share. So little backstory about me. I went to school for business and accounting. I kind of got into shrimp by accident. I really started raising shrimp just to kind of feed my fish. And then for whatever reason, I was just staring at my shrimp tank all the time. And then I killed them. And I'm like, man, like I really got to do this. And I tried it again and I was successful. And I tried to use an RO water because everyone said to use RO water. And I used the RO water just in the tank. And then I remineralized it while it was in the tank. And it was just a disaster. So I killed those shrimp. And so I learned through trial and error. And I eventually just was like, man, I love doing this so much that I feel like I need to start a business. There was really no one around me that was doing it. So my number one passion is aquariums. My number two passion is business. I just love them. So it made sense to kind of merge both of them together. And so I started Flip Aquatics in 2014. And just to give you a little backstory, so I do own a business. I sell shrimp. We sell nano fish. We sell all kinds of stuff. But when I got into it with the idea that I wanted to breed shrimp in the U.S., provide healthy shrimp to the United States market so that there weren't all these people, you know, that were importing overseas. They were bringing it into the U.S. and they were selling it. Like, you guys know those people that do pre-sales before the shrimp even get there or the fish even get there. And then all of a sudden they literally just take the bag and ship it to you. And that, you know, you lose 90% of them. Like, that's what I was experiencing when I was a hobbyist. I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I'm like, I'm going to start this business. I'm going to breed these shrimp in the United States. And I'm going to completely flip the way that everyone does aquatics. And so that's why we're Flip Aquatics. But that was my vision. This is a picture of my buddy's truck. I don't know if you guys can see it real well. It's a 6-foot bed. There's 2 pallets on the back and there's 16 40-gallon breeders. And literally, hopefully my mic doesn't mess up, there's 1 pallet strap. Like, that's all there is. So we had to drive 45 minutes, $1 per gallon Petco sale with that in the back of the truck down highways. Scariest trip of my life. But for me, the reason I tell that is because I was like, if I go to $1 per gallon sale, I think I bought 20 40-gallon tanks, 20 longs. I was like, if I buy those, I'm going to max out my credit card and I have no other option but to do this business. So that was me being like, I'm going to make it happen. So they sat in my parents' garage for like 3 months before I was able to do anything. But Flip Aquatics now, so we don't breed shrimp in the United States as much anymore. And the reason for that is I did it for about 2 years, and I found that I just couldn't keep up with demand. And so people were constantly upset, like, hey, you guys never have stock. And all these people that I felt like were doing bad business practices were only getting bigger, and we were just staying the same size. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to import shrimp, but I'm going to do it in a way that no one's done it before. So we implemented a 30-day quarantine, which I'll talk about later on in the presentation. We guarantee 100% live arrival. We guarantee they don't have any parasites, diseases, and if they do, we'll replace them. So we really want to take that extra step. So me as like, I want to say I was probably like 26, 27 when I did my first import. I spent literally every dollar I had. It was like $8,000, and you just have no idea. I drove to Chicago to pick it up. I'm from Ohio, so it's like 6.5 hour drive. I got there, I'm like opening the boxes, like, is everybody okay? Like, I didn't know what was happening. So I was super nervous, but thank God it worked out. And so, you know, Flip Aquatics is doing so much better. We're so much bigger now. We're the #1 online retailer of freshwater shrimp in the United States. We import about 250,000 shrimp every year. We also do our fish, we do snails, we do plants, we do hard goods. And so I don't stand up here to like brag or anything like that. Like if anything, like it's so crazy that somebody like me who just got in the hobby maybe 12 years ago, started the business, 8 years ago, is able to stand up here at one of the premier aquatic shows, give a talk on shrimp, have a business that's super successful. So I always like to just give a little glory to God. I don't know if you guys are believers, but it's crazy that somebody like me was able to do that. So I always just like giving a shout out to that. So Flip Aquatics now, super successful. And one of the coolest things that I do is YouTube. And I consider it one of our biggest success points. And it isn't that like, hey, we make videos and we make money. What I love about it is YouTube really presents a window into Flip Aquatics. It allows you to see our mistakes, the things that we do, what we're doing good, what we're doing bad. And really, like, I learned through YouTube, so you can go back and follow my whole journey of when I started in my parents' basement to I got a warehouse, and then we expanded the warehouse. Now we're getting bigger. And so it's cool to have it up there. And I like showing this picture. This is a video I did. This is Bonnie. I went and visited her fish room maybe 5-6 years ago. I want to say she was in her 90s at the time, so I don't even know if she's still around. But Bonnie was a person that was in a domestic abusive relationship, and she was still with that person, and it was just really tough for her. So aquariums were an escape for her. So the ability that I have to go and share Bonnie's story with, everybody that wants to watch it is just so, it's just so empowering. So that's something that I really love. So again, this is all just backstory about me. Just gives you guys a little insight to who I am and what I do and what we do at Flip Aquatics and stuff like that. But let's actually get into the talk. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free, raise your hand, like super nonchalant. We can do whatever. And so the first step to setting up a shrimp aquarium, this is going to sound funny, is pick your shrimp. So many people set up their tank and they're like, okay, like I'm going to go get shrimp. I'm going to figure out which kind I want, just get it. Like maybe this won't work. The first thing you need to do is actually pick your shrimp. And I'm going to tell you why. Different shrimp need different parameters. There's all kinds of different shrimp. The most common ones would be your Neocaridina, which is like your cherry shrimp, your blue dreams, green jades, orange pumpkins, things like that. So that's one type. And then you have Caridina crystal, which are like your crystal reds, golden bees, stuff like that. Then you have tiger shrimp, and then you also have Taiwan bee shrimp. And all these shrimp could potentially require different parameters. So it's always good to decide, like, this is the shrimp I want, and then go from there. So everyone knows Neocaridina shrimp. They prefer a pH of above 7. They prefer KH in their water a little bit harder. They're known as easier to keep, but it's all relative. The reason that people think they're easier to keep is simply because you can just throw them in everything or any type of aquarium and maybe they'll do good. Whereas the rest of them need a very specific setup beforehand. So like that's why people think they're actually easier. If you ask me, I think Caridina shrimp are actually easier because there's less parasites, there's less diseases, there's less chances of things going wrong. And most people keep Caridina shrimp the same way. So you can really kind of set up one aquarium that works for most Caridina shrimp. So we'll talk about that too. Crystal shrimp, just really pretty shrimp. They're considered the beginner Caridina shrimp type. They prefer a pH of less than 7. So most of the time you need an active substrate. Same thing with tigers for the most part. Some tigers prefer a pH above 7, some below 7. different breeders breed them different ways, different stores keep them in different parameters. So tiger shrimp are like the wild card. We're not always sure like exactly what's perfect for them. So that's where, we're going to get into some tips later about how to keep them. But Taiwan bees are considered the hardest to keep shrimp. But in reality, like I said, if you have the right setup, they're actually one of the easiest shrimp to keep. It's just all the work beforehand. So again, the first step is deciding what shrimp you want to keep. And the next step is doing your research. So that sounds so funny. We always say like research, research, research. And this is what I mean by research. It's so important to match parameters. Now, what I mean by that is like, I'm going to give a talk today based on if you bought my shrimp, how I keep my shrimp. And so if you do all these things in this talk, I will guarantee that you will have success with your shrimp because I've done it for so long. I know my shrimp. I know how I keep them, and I know exactly what they need. But if you go buy from somebody completely different, they might use completely different products than I do. They might use different food. They might have a different filter. They might have different water parameters, a different pH. And so not all shrimp are created equal in that sense because some breeders just do it different. So it's always important. It doesn't matter who you get them from. In no way am I trying to influence you to buy shrimp from me. But whoever you get the shrimp from, the first thing I would do is reach out to them and be like, hey, what products do you use for this shrimp? What equipment do you use? How do you keep them? What's the pH? And then match those parameters as close as you can. So that's what I mean by matching the parameters. I think that's an extremely important step. And obviously you can jump on YouTube, things like that, and look up some videos and find out in general, how to keep them. But it's always best to go to the source. And so you're going to really learn a lot about the source if they're like, oh, I don't know. Like, we just keep them in tap water. So like you'll really start seeing like, who knows what they're talking about versus who doesn't. So it's always nice to ask that question. So step 3, decide on tank size. Now, again, it seems really basic. And so I want to give you guys an analogy, right? And this is a funny one, so don't judge me. And what I'm going to say probably isn't true, but picture me up here right now, and let's say like my stomach's upset, and I might pass a little gas, right? If you don't hear it, you're probably not going to know. Am I right? So like I can just be up here, passing gas, doing my thing, and you guys will never know. But take that same thing. Let's cram us all into a very tight room or an elevator, and I do the same thing. You guys are going to be like, man, this Rob guy, what is he doing? Like, that is the rudest thing he could have ever did. And so the reason I say that is aquariums are very similar. Now, what I mean by that, and I'll follow with me, is in a small aquarium, the smallest mistake makes a huge impact. Whereas in a really big aquarium, a small mistake really doesn't make an impact. It's the same thing. Like, if we're in an elevator, everyone's going to know that I did it. But if I'm up here, no one has any idea. So same thing with aquariums. So bigger is always better. It creates stability. It gives you a little bit of leeway. With nanotanks, which we'll talk about, is they're very unstable in the sense that like evaporation plays a huge part in it. So if you don't have the lid covered, like parameters can change really quick. So I always recommend nanotanks to experienced hobbyists that understand evaporation, topping off with distilled water versus tap water. The other thing is with temperature. Shrimp are tolerant to temperature to an extent, but if there's sudden changes, like in Texas, it's like 100 degrees. So like one day, your house might be at 70 degrees, your air conditioner goes out and it goes up to 100 degrees. A small tank, the temperature in that tank is going to change much faster than say like 120 gallon or even a 20 gallon. So always go with the biggest tank that you can because that's going to make your life so much easier. So decide on your tank size, and the bigger you can go, the better off you're going to be. Now, as far as equipment goes, we're just going to go through some equipment. We're not going to talk about lights because really any light's fine. It's completely your preference. But we're going to talk about the things that make a difference. So the first thing is heaters. Heaters, I'm just going to start off by saying I do not recommend heaters, and here's why. A typical heater works like this. Let's say you have a heater set to 70 degrees, right? That heater might not kick on until your tank hits 68 degrees. It might heat your water up all the way until it hits 72 degrees, and then you're going to constantly have like the roller coaster effect. So like temperatures up, temperatures down, temperatures up, temperatures down. And that is so unstable. And what it can do is it can induce molting in shrimp, which is going to cause you a ton of issues. Now, heaters also go bad. They might last 2 years, 3 years, 4 years if you have a really good one. But if you're not paying attention to it, there's all those times where like it just stops working or it sticks on, and then you're going to have all kinds of issues. You come home to cook shrimp. I've done that before. I've come home where the heater stopped working and everything died because the temperature fell so much. So here's what I recommend. Shrimp are so tolerant to temperature as long as it's not like super drastic changes like a roller coaster. If it's just consistently up and then consistently down, shrimp are going to do just fine. So leave them at room temperature as long as it's not, in Dallas, you guys got to figure out something because it's way too hot for shrimp here. But no, if you have AC, you should be fine. Just leave them at room temperature. A lot of people think that shrimp are tropical too. In nature, shrimp come from like slow moving streams in the forest where the water, is coming off a mountain. It might not be very, very hot at all. It might be like 60 degrees. And so shrimp are very tolerant to temperature when it's not in big changes. So big thing to know. So I would never recommend a heater for shrimp. Filter. There's a couple different options. We only use matin filters for our shrimp. And I got another slide that shows you what a matin filter is. But it's basically a big sponge that has tons of surface area. And so what that does is it's really easy to run. It's just ran by air. The only problem with it is it's a little hard to maintenance. So like if you have a tank set up for more than a year, you actually have to pull it out, squeegee it out and then put it back in. So it can be kind of a pain, but it's really cheap and really easy to use. And it creates a huge feeding ground for the shrimp. Next one that I would recommend is a sponge filter. Again, the only difference with that one is that it's less surface area, but it's going to work just the same. The cool thing about a sponge filter is it's much easier to take out of the tank, clean it, maintenance it, put it back in. If you have 2 filters in one tank, then you can, pre-seed filters, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then the last thing I'd recommend is just a power filter. I mean, there's so many options out there. The one thing you're going to need is an intake sponge. So this is what a matin filter looks like. It's literally, it goes on a whole side of your aquarium. It takes up the whole side of the aquarium. So tons of surface area, and really that becomes a feeding ground for your shrimp. So it's really great. The other negative to it is it's kind of ugly. So if you're going for like that display type, you really have to get creative on what your tank looks like and how you use that. But it definitely can be done and done in a really creative way to make it look great. But definitely the filter that we recommend. Filtration, the intake sponges. So this is what we recommend if you have a power filter. Literally, you just slide over the intake. So it makes your power filter safe for the babies. And so it's a great way just to, immediately, make whatever filter you have work. The one thing with these is they do clog easier because power filters pull a lot more water through them. And so they can clog. So definitely take those out, clean them every once in a while. But that's filtration. Now, this is one that a lot of people mess up on. Now, we might have grown since, I initially started doing these talks. But the biggest issue that we found with people just get into it is they go to get shrimp, so they get shrimp substrate. Newsflash. Shrimp substrate isn't good for all shrimp. So what most shrimp-specific substrate is it's called active substrate or buffering substrate. And what it does, it absorbs the KH out of the water and lowers the pH. So this is what we use. It's called, we just call it Brightwell shrimp soil, but it's Rio Oscuro F. There's F, XF, M. It's all the same stuff, just different millimeter sizes. This is great for most Caridina. So what this substrate does, like I said, is it will actually absorb KH out of the water, lower the pH below 7, and hold it stable. So that way you can really have a good environment for Caridina shrimp, most Caridina shrimp. So this is what we use for like Taiwan bees, crystals, most tigers, but definitely not Neocaridina. So for Neocaridina, which are your easier to keep shrimp, and I see everybody fanning. It is so hot. It is just crazy. So Dallas, again, I don't know how you guys do it. Like even standing up here, I'm just sweating like crazy. But anyway, Neocaridinas prefer an inert substrate. So basically what inert means is it's not going to buffer your water in any way, shape, or form. That's super important. So what we use Shrimp King soil. It's actually called, it's Dennerle, with Shrimp King Dennerle. It's pretty much the same thing, but it's just a regular substrate. Like there's nothing in it. It's just sand, different colors. And I think they have black, they have white, they have this brown color. They have a bunch of other ones. So that's one way that you can go. Pool filtered sand or pool filter sand, you can get mostly everywhere. That stuff's really good. I use that for the longest time. Eco Complete most of the time works. Fluorite, most of the time works as well. So just do your research, make sure it's an inert substrate, and it will work for your Neocaridina and some tiger shrimp. Next thing is choosing your food. And before I get into this one, just know, never fall into the trap of like, I always need the next best food. Because there's always that marketing that says like, oh, there's this new food out. It's the greatest food that you've ever seen ever in your whole life. You need it. And shrimp don't eat very much, so what happens is you end up accumulating 20 different types of food, and it just spoils over time. So what I recommend is use what works for you. So what I'll tell you is what works for us. First of all, Bacter.AE is a product that I've used since I started in the hobby. It's just an amazing product, and I absolutely love it. It's hard to foul the water with it, although it can be done. So less is always more. I mean, I don't even think I have that slide in here, but just know that less is always more in most senses, unless when it comes to aquariums. Bigger is always better when it comes to tank size. So Bacter.AE is a great food. I don't think we have any, so like I'm sure you can find it on Amazon. I'm sure you can find it in local places. A lot of people carry it in the shrimp community. For Neocaridina, we feed Northland food, so we feed veggie, community, and kelp wafer. Those are our main foods, and sometimes we'll actually grind them up, turn it into like a really fine powder, and feed it that way. But really great foods there. For Caridina, we tend to go a little bit more high-end with the food, and so we feed Shrimp King mineral, protein, and complete. Now, protein is best for when you have buried females, because buried females are going to use up a lot more protein, and if they just continuously keep getting buried, they'll eventually deplete themselves of protein and die. And so if you're finding like dead buried females, that's normally what's happening, is they didn't have enough protein. So protein is just a good additive to use, and so we always recommend it. Again, we do pretty much the same thing with the Caridina food. We put all three types together, grind it up, and feed it in a powder, and that's how we made it easier on us. So the next thing is Botanicals. I absolutely love Botanicals, but there are some things that can go wrong. There's, obviously you can get pesticides on leaves. If you're pulling them from your backyard, you just never know what's on them. Different sources online, some may be trusted, others might not. So you really have to be careful where you get Botanicals from. And I'll go through which ones I recommend, which ones we use. But the biggest thing is don't ever go overboard, because you can run into problems. Your tank can get too much tannin in there. There can be too much mold, and it just pollutes your tank. So again, less is always better. We recommend using alder cones. Have been really good for us. We also use Indian almond leaves. We use Malaysian driftwood, spiderwood. If you use things like grapewood, they release a lot of sugar, so you can get a ton of biofilm. So just use those woods sparingly. And if you guys don't know what biofilm is, it looks like mold in an aquarium. If you've ever used a piece of driftwood, I'm sure you know what it looks like. So Botanicals, it's completely optional, but they do help in most situations. Now rocks is the last thing. It's so tough because rocks are minerals, right? So having rock in your aquarium is going to add minerals to your aquarium most of the time. Now, there's ways to seal rock so it doesn't leach into your aquarium, but dragonstone, which you can see in the back, is one of the ones that's made out of clay. So most of the time, it will not alter your pH. It won't alter your GH, your KH, anything like that. So it's pretty safe to use. But other rocks like stone is really going to raise your GH most of the time. It can raise your KH. It can alter your pH, which in turn causes stress for your shrimp. So I don't recommend using rocks unless you test them beforehand and know exactly what they're going to do to your aquarium. So let me get a sip of water real quick. Again, it is hot in Dallas, especially back here. I feel like, I don't know why, but it feels hotter back here than it does up front. I don't know if you guys realize that too, but like we got the short end of the stick back here. Okay, the right water. Again, it sounds so basic, right? Obviously, we want the right water, but I want to talk it through with you all so you can understand where I'm coming from. The first thing is tap water and well water. I'll give you an example. We live in an area where our tap water is phenomenal. It is so good for shrimp. So we use it for all of our Neocaridina shrimp. And what we do is we have like really good filtration. We have 2 towers of carbon to remove the chloramine and the ammonia out of the water. We have a sediment filter. So like we're filtering this water really good. But lately, because there's certain things going on, they're treating with certain chemicals, different things are happening, our pH coming out of the tap has dropped significantly. So we've never had this issue before, and all of a sudden we started having issues in some of our tanks. We're like, what's going on? And the pH is dropping to like 4, and that's so stressful on shrimp. They need consistency. And so we realized that something's going on with our tap water. So we're actually having to go through all of our tanks, add crushed coral to the tank to add calcium back in, and it's just been a total pain in the butt. So tap water, well water, it can be inconsistent. Let's say you live out in the middle of the country and you have the best well water in the world. Well, come rainy season, when they're plowing the fields, they're spraying pesticides, that can get into your water, and it might not be harmful for people. It might not be harmful for dogs and cats, but it could be extremely harmful for fish, for different types of invertebrates. So it's always a risk. Now, most of the time, it's going to be just fine. If you know what to look for, you can use it, but there is a lot of risk there. So here's what I recommend. RODI water or RO water, distilled water, is definitely the way to guarantee that you have perfect water every time. Now, I know when I first got into it, I told you guys earlier, I got an aquarium. I heard that RO water was the best thing in the world, so I got an RO filter. I put my RO water in there, I remineralized in the tank, and I killed everything. So I was like, man, like I shouldn't have switched. But what it is really understanding how to use RO water to your benefit. So RO water, you don't have to have some elaborate setup. You can order some cheap online, make it yourself. You can buy distilled water at the store. Never get anything that's like flavored or minerals added back in for taste. Always get just straight distilled water. And I'm going to show you how to make it really easy and work for you every single time so that I can guarantee you guys are going to have success with your water. So that's step 6. We're actually going to talk about how to remineralize water. So for Neocaridina, which are your cherry shrimp, things like that, and some tiger shrimp that prefer a pH above 7, what we use is a product called Shrimp Mineral GH and KH+. So it's really important to know that it has GH in it, which stands for general hardness, and it also has KH in it, which stands for carbonate hardness. This is really good to use for shrimp that need a higher pH. And what the KH does, carbonate hardness, is it stabilizes pH and it raises it above 7. So it's really hard to have a tank that has KH in it and have the pH below 7. So what we do is we start off with distilled water or RO water. The TDS of distilled water, again, this might sound a little complicated, but I promise you it's easy. Does everybody know what a TDS pen is? Yeah? So maybe 60% of people. So a TDS pen, you can get one on Amazon. They're called TDS-EZ. So TDS Easy. And literally what it measures is total dissolved solids in your water. So distilled water should have 0. It should have nothing in it. It's just water. There's no minerals in it, nothing in it. That's what you want. RO water, DI water, sometimes it has up to 10 parts per million in it. So 0 to 10, that's acceptable. Anything over 10, like if you're getting like 20, 30, there's obviously something still in that water, which you probably shouldn't put into your aquarium. So the building block, you start with water that is 0 to 10. And then all you do is you mix this powder in until you get to a TDS of 200. As soon as you get to 200, your water's good. Every single time. We don't jump in there and measure GH. We don't measure KH. We just set our TDS. We know that when we start at 0, when we get to 200, that water is good for Neocaridina. So that's as simple as it can get. Now, once it's in the aquarium, TDS really doesn't mean anything because there's 100 things that play into TDS. Like if you're overfeeding, there's organics in the water, your TDS can go up. If you're dosing fertilizer, your TDS can go up. So the only time TDS is really good is when you're mixing water. So we use the salty shrimp, GH and KH+, remineralize it to 200. Now, granted, you can be 180, you can be 220, anywhere in that range, and you're going to be fine. And again, like I literally will guarantee that you have success if you get our shrimp and follow all these procedures. Like I will replace your shrimp. I'll come to your house, figure out what's going on. Like we will make sure you guys are successful. And so this just makes it super easy and it guarantees that you're going to have success. And a good rule for everyone that doesn't want to use RO water is the best method or the best ratio of general hardness to carbonate hardness, which is GH to KH, is 2 to 1. So for every GH you have, you should have 1 KH. So for us, the ideal is probably like 10 GH, 5 KH, somewhere in that range. Now, granted, you don't have to measure that if you're doing the remineralizing like I just talked about, but it's always, every once in a while it's good to just check and see where you're at because, sometimes salt can get messed up or it's not mixed up as good. So definitely worth noting. Now, for Caridina shrimp or most shrimp that prefer a pH of less than 7, it's the same product. It just doesn't have the KH in it. So it's just called Shrimp Mineral GH+. Now, there's a lot of companies that sell this. I know Shrimp King has one. Brightwell has one. We personally use the Garnellenhaus is the type of brand, and we've used it ever since I started. So just what I know, it's what I'm used to. So that's why I continue to use it, and it's worked really well for us. But this is what we use, and again, not having the KH in there is how we're able to lower that pH with that active substrate. The active substrate will pull KH out of the water, but it will deplete the substrate quicker. So if you just never have KH, your substrate is going to last a whole lot longer. And so super easy. It's what I recommend to anyone. And just because I know it's a complex thing and it's not always the easiest thing to pick up. Does anyone have any questions on remineralizing? Yes. Hold on, I'll come back there. I'll put you on the spot. Hopefully it doesn't mess up.
What if you have a tank that's been set up for a while and it gets so like to 230, 240? Can you just pull some out and just add straight RO?
So that's actually a really good question. So just in case you guys didn't get it, she asked if you have an aquarium that's set up, and let's say you set it up for Neocaridina, right? And you want a TDS at 200. Once that water's in the tank, there's going to be evaporation. Evaporation doesn't take minerals out of the water. So what happens is the minerals stay in there. So you might start off with a TDS at 200, but if you're not equating for evaporation, then that water is going to slowly rise in TDS. So it might be 240, 230, or 250. If that's the case, as long as you're not dosing fertilizer, because if you're dosing fertilizer, it's going to throw that number way off, is you would just use straight RO water. But what I found, the easiest thing, if you have a weekly regimen or a bi-weekly water change schedule, most of the time you don't even have to account for that because you're taking the water out and you're putting 200 TDS water back in. So most of the time it will just balance out and it'll be okay. The biggest tip I could give you is covering the lid of your aquarium or covering the top of your aquarium will prevent the evaporation and then you won't have that issue as much. But you can definitely add just straight RO water, distilled water to kind of balance out that TDS. So good question. Any other questions? And we'll have time at the end too. Yeah.
Cage. You do not check the GH and KH after you've mineralized and you put 200 TDS in. You don't worry about GH and KH anymore?
No, especially if you have a good regimen. Like if you didn't do a water change for a year, then I would probably start, being like, oh, like some of your plants might have consumed the KH or your beneficial bacteria might have consumed the KH. And then at that point, you will have to get in there and kind of adjust your water, do a big water change. But if you have like a weekly or bi-weekly schedule of doing water changes, I don't think you'll ever have to worry about it. Because again, like we literally bring in, 250,000 shrimp a year. We have a ton of shrimp tanks and rarely do we have any issues. And we just kind of follow the same step and rinse and repeat kind of method. And so I don't think you really have to do it, but it is always better to check, right? If you have the time and you want to, checking your GH and KH is always good because it kind of lets you know where you're at. And so you can always add salt back in, or you can do a bigger water change if you need to. And so, yeah, great questions. Anything else before I move on? And again, we can come back to it. Okay. Hey, Emma. All right, so cycling, I guess I missed that. Step 7 would be cycling an aquarium. We all have ways of cycling an aquarium, right? You can, seat a filter. You can take an old filter, squeeze it out in there. You can add some fish in there, some snails, different things like that to really get the cycle going. So most people have their own method. You can add ammonia to your aquarium and then test your water parameters until you start seeing nitrate, and then you know that you're good. And so there's a lot of ways to do it. So most of us understand how to cycle an aquarium. So I won't spend a lot of time on all the methods that you guys know, but we're in a very unique situation where we go from like having a tank that has no shrimp in it whatsoever to all of a sudden we have 1,000 shrimp in it. So we had to come up with something very unique to kind of, how do we cycle that many aquariums? What do we do? A tank might be empty for 2 months and then all of a sudden has 1,000 shrimp in it. That was a very difficult process for us to kind of go through. So a couple products that we use that I think are great, and I'm not sponsored by at least this person. I'm sponsored by the next person, but I would recommend it anyway. Just full transparency. But TurboStart is a Fritz product. They're actually here at the show, so if you guys have questions about this, you can definitely, you got a Fritz shirt on, I see it. So you can definitely go there, check them out, talk to them more about it. But they have a bacteria that will instantly cycle your tank. But there's a couple things you need to know about it. This product will not work if your tank has a pH of less than 7 and you have no KH in your water. It just won't work. Because the type of bacteria, it actually consumes the carbonate, which is the KH, and that's how it starts its cycle. So if you have no KH in your tank, it's never gonna thrive. And even if you have KH in your tank, if the pH is less than 7, it's not gonna do well for you. So this is really good for Neocaridinas or anything that has a pH above 7. So like cichlids, it would work phenomenal for. And some cichlids. I guess some cichlids like a pH of less than 7. But yeah, just an amazing product. So what we do is we bring in these shrimp. As soon as we put the shrimp in, we dose this, and then we wait a couple days, and then we dose it one more time. And then we never have issues with cycle. So this is a phenomenal product. It literally smells like straight sewage though. Just a warning. So if you get it and it's ripe, it's a good thing. It's not like, oh, this product went bad. But it's a really good product. I'm sure you guys can get it local. Fritz is actually a local company to Dallas. And so I'm sure it's really accessible around here. Now, since TurboStart won't work at a pH of less than 7, we got to talk about what we use for a pH of less than 7. So Brightwell, full transparency, is one of my sponsors. So I would recommend their product anyway. But we use Florinbacter 1. And this one is a little bit slower. So live bacteria in a tank of a pH of less than 6 or less than 7 is much harder to get going. So it's probably a good idea to use the old school methods, like put a fish in there for a couple weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, something like that. I know 8 weeks and 2 months are the same thing, but nobody's judging. So you can do some of the old school methods and really have success that way. But if you were like us, you get a lot of shrimp in, or you're impatient or want to get a tank just going, we dose this for like 2 weeks until we can actually test and make sure there's nitrates. So that's the key with this. But it is a little bit more of a pain in the butt because you have to dose it for 2 weeks. You got to use a lot more of it. It's not as effective as TurboStart. Now the next thing, and again, I'm sorry, I'm sure you guys see me, like I'm literally sweating bullets up here. I really don't know how Dallas does it. You guys, it is so hot here. So anyway, I'll get back on topic. Step 8, plants and snails. I think they're great for aquariums, and this is why. Shrimp have what I consider a negative bioload. So that means they don't produce much waste, or if any. So if you just have, let's say, 10 shrimp in a 10-gallon tank, there's a chance that even though you have a cycle going, that cycle will actually die because there's not enough ammonia, there's not enough nitrate to keep that cycle going. And that's when you have these people that have this amazing colony of shrimp, they're breeding like crazy, and then all of a sudden the whole tank dies. And they're like, what happened? And it's mostly because they had a tank that was cycled, it uncycled itself because there wasn't enough waste, and then it recycled, and that's what killed them. So using things like shrimp, or not shrimp, snails will not harm your shrimp unless they're assassin snails are known for if they can catch a shrimp, they'll eat a shrimp. But most snails, like Malaysian trumpet snails, mystery snails are my favorite because they're literally like Hoover vacuums. Like they eat anything. They clean up leftover food. They're just amazing to have in your tank because they produce so much waste and they're such a good cleanup crew that they're almost symbiotic with shrimp. I think they work really well together. Another thing that we've noticed is like if you're using botanicals, mystery snails will actually eat the botanicals, digest it quicker, and then shrimp will actually eat their poop. So it kind of just all works together. So I always recommend keeping snails with your aquarium or with shrimp. I just think it's a really good benefit. Now, the next thing is live plants. Like obviously, if you can keep live plants, it's always a better thing because you're creating a natural environment. So I highly recommend plants. But one specifically that I want to talk about, and I know people, are weird about duckweed, but duckweed is such an amazing plant for the simple fact it pulls so much nutrient out of the water, nitrates and things like that, that it's almost like when you're scooping out duckweed, it's pretty much like doing a water change because you're taking what that duckweed used to grow, you're taking it out of the aquarium. And I mean, it's such a benefit. So like, let's say you're someone that overfeeds. Well, duckweed is going to grow based on how much nutrient is in the water. So if you're overfeeding, there's going to be more ammonia, there's going to be more nitrate. And so your floating plants, because they're exposed to the air, they have more access to carbon dioxide. It's carbon dioxide, not monoxide. Carbon dioxide, so CO2. So they're going to grow a whole lot faster. So I always recommend plants in aquarium, floating plants, if you're comfortable with it. It doesn't have to be duckweed. It could be salvinia, red root floaters, frogbit. There's a lot of different options out there. Next step, which again, sounds super basic, but buy your shrimp. So you already have the tank set up, you decide on the size, you know how to remineralize, you have all your equipment, you're ready to go. Now you're like, okay, I'm ready to buy my shrimp. So the first thing is consider the source. I talked to you earlier about, reaching out to wherever you want to buy them from, ask them questions about how they keep them, what parameters, things like that. That's going to tell you a whole lot about that company. A trick that I used to use back when I was a hobbyist is if I knew somebody was an importer and they'd be like, hey, like our shrimp arrive on July 1st. I'd be like, oh, that's awesome. How soon can I get my shrimp? And if they say like, oh, I can ship them out July 2nd, that's not a person you want to buy from because obviously they don't care much about the animal if they're literally getting it in and then reselling it because shrimp need stability. And we're going to talk about it in just a second. So it's always good to kind of figure out like who's your trusted source, who you can go to get shrimp, and then follow that. So there's two types of shrimp. Obviously, there's imported shrimp, which come out of the country. There's benefits to them. Usually they're larger, they breed quicker, they have better color. There's some risk to them. They might have parasites, they might have diseases, whereas homebred shrimp are usually healthier, but they're much smaller. Homebred shrimp could be much more interbred, and so their genetics might not be as good. So there's definitely some pros and cons to both, but again, reach out to whoever you want to buy from and talk to that person, really get some insight on the source of the shrimp, what they recommend, things like that, and I'll tell you a lot about the source. Now, 30-day quarantine. So I told you when we started importing, the one thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to hold the shrimp for 30 days. Now, I didn't just say 30-day quarantine sounds cool, or, we're going to quarantine them for 1 month. I actually had a reason for it. So whenever you get shrimp in, they go through shipping, and that's stressful. Even if you're just bringing them from the pet store to your house, that's still a stressful process. You're acclimating them to new water. What's going to happen is shrimp molt. So they shed their exoskeleton. My goodness, I can't even talk. They shed their exoskeleton, and they usually do it early because of the stress. And so we'll bring in shrimp from Taiwan, and we bring them in, and there's molts everywhere the next day in the aquariums. They're in the bag, they're in the aquarium, and so they're molting earlier. So shrimp molt every 30 days for the most part. Adult shrimp molt every 30 days. So because shrimp molted due to stress, their next molt is going to be the most difficult molt that they have, because most of the time they went early, they didn't build up enough nutrients. And so what we want to do is we want to hold the shrimp until they molt again, just to make sure they're not going to have a failed molt, make sure they're healthy. And we know if they make it through that second molt, they're going to be good. That is a healthy shrimp. And so I think it's important for every company to hold shrimp for 30 days. Now, I know, some pet stores just can't do it. Some other stores just don't want to do it. But if you can find people that hold their shrimp for at least a month just to make sure they're going to molt, that's just going to be a higher quality shrimp, and you're going to have much more success. And so I always preach it. It's so good to just hold the shrimp, give them stability before they go to their next home. Now, multiple sources. This is a thing that I got into really early on in my I was going to say career, but in my shrimp keeping journey, is I was always like, man, I want the best genetics. So I'm going to order some shrimp from source A, some shrimp from source B, from C, from D. I'm going to add them all together, and it's going to be great. What I found out is when you get shrimp from multiple sources, it's kind of like the Pilgrims and the Indians, in the fact that the Pilgrims had certain diseases that the Indians never even saw, or the Indians had certain diseases that the Pilgrims never even saw. So something that might be just a cold to Pilgrims would kill a whole village of Indians, and vice versa. It's the same thing with shrimp. You have some shrimp that are used to a certain bacteria that another shrimp never even experienced before. So I started ordering all these different shrimp from different places, from different sources, and then I would have one group of shrimp do phenomenal, and all the other ones die, and I'd be like, man, these places don't have very good shrimp. But really what it was is it's just some shrimp are used to a certain bacteria, while other ones aren't. And so that's really important. So if you ever are going to buy shrimp from multiple sources, you should do it in a brand new aquarium. Some people will be like, hey, I've had the same aquarium for 2 years. I've been breeding cherry shrimp. I want to get new genetics in there. I would never add new cherry shrimp to an old cherry shrimp colony unless you're setting up a new aquarium and taking, 10 shrimp from the old colony, 10 shrimp from the new order, and doing it that way. It just, don't put all your eggs in one basket, because bacteria is a serious thing, and it can wipe out a whole shrimp colony pretty quick. Now, the next thing is you got your shrimp in, you ordered them, you picked them up from your favorite pet store, whatever you want to do. Now, the most important thing is acclimation. This is an area where everyone's super excited. I'm just leaving Aquashella. I can't wait to get my shrimp in their new aquarium, and they just dump them right in. Well, you got to know a couple things. It's 120 degrees back here. These shrimp are super hot. Their water's 90 degrees. Your tank at home might be 70 degrees, and if you just float those shrimp for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, that's going to drastically change the temperature in that bag and potentially kill your shrimp, because they're going to mold, they're going to be stressed out. And so just know that shipping in general is stressful, and so is temperature. And so, again, we talked about bag temperature. This is a big one. We only ship in breather bags. Now, there's nothing wrong with shipping in regular bags, but breather bags, I don't know if you guys know what a breather bag is. It's pretty much an equal exchange of oxygen to carbon dioxide. And so livestock can stay in the bag without air and just breathe through the bag for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, as long as the poop in the bag or one of them doesn't die and the ammonia spikes and kills them. So we use breather bags. The biggest thing to know is if there's no air in the bag of shrimp that you got or any livestock, most likely it's a breather bag, and you can only float that for 30 minutes. And the reason being is when water touches the outside, it cuts off the CO2 exchange, and so those shrimp basically, or whatever's in that bag, is going to suffocate. So that's a really important thing to know just before you start ordering shrimp. Just know that breather bags will suffocate any livestock after 30 minutes. So we talked about the temperature. So here's what I recommend. If you buy shrimp and there's no deaths in the bag, obviously if there's deaths in the bag, we have to do something a little bit different, which we'll talk about in a second. But if you bring your shrimp home, you can check the temperature with a thermal temperature scanner if you have one. If not, the best thing that I found is just set that bag of shrimp on your counter or on your table or on a shelf and let it sit for 24 hours. Like 24 hours isn't going to make a difference when it comes to shrimp because they don't consume much oxygen anyway. So even if it's a normal bag of water, they're going to be fine. Let that bag sit overnight, and so it acclimates to the temperature of your house. And most likely, if you're not using a heater, your water temperature is going to be the same of whatever your house is. And so then the next day, you're ready to go. Now, let's say you get your shrimp in. There's deaths in the bag. Obviously, you got to open that bag up. There's obviously ammonia in there because there's deaths, and that's super lethal to shrimp. So you want to get on it right away. Now, the wrong thing to do is scoop all the shrimp out, throw them in your tank. Now, we're going to have to do something like that because it's kind of an emergency situation. So what we found is a product called ACCR, which is, again, by Fritz. We really like Fritz. Is a great product. Shrimp Prep is another product by Brightwell. You just put a little bit in there to neutralize the ammonia. So that way, the water's okay, at least for a couple hours. You can start acclimating them. You don't have to rush it. You can remove the death. What I don't want you to do is, I know Seachem Prime is a really good product. I used it for a long time. It's very, very effective, and it's very concentrated. Same thing with Fritz has a product called Complete. It's a super concentrated dechlorinator, and so you only have to use like a little bit to treat like your whole tank. Well, what that does is if you use something like Seachem Prime that is very concentrated, it'll actually cut off the oxygen exchange in the water in such a small amount of water, and it'll suffocate your shrimp. So that's why you have to use something like ACCR that is much more watered down. It's much more scaled back. You're not going to run into those issues of cutting off oxygen exchange. So great product to have on hand. The next thing is, once you actually start acclimating, my favorite way to acclimate is overnight. I literally grab a piece of airline tubing. It's called drip acclimation. A piece of airline tubing, a little clip. I put the airline tubing only in the aquarium, maybe like an inch, and then I start the siphon, and I just let that drip, like one drip every 2, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, and just slowly let it drip into the water that the shrimp came in. And you can let that run all night, and how you're not going to have it overflow is you only put the airline in the water enough that that's the amount of water it's going to pull out of your tank. So if you only have, granted, if you have a 300-gallon tank and you have an inch deep, like that's going to suck some water out. But if you have like a 10-gallon tank and you only put the airline in maybe an inch or a little bit more than that, it's only going to pull out maybe half a gallon at the most. So if you got a 5-gallon bucket or a big bowl, you can really let that drip acclimate overnight. Another thing which I don't have on here, something that we really found with importing a lot of fish, and not necessarily shrimp, they're much hardier, but it's very important when acclimating. A really good key, a tip to success would be keep it as dark as possible. Now that sounds so silly, but like when we acclimate, we use black containers. We turn the lights off. We block out the light on the tank. So like best time to acclimate is at night, because when you have shrimp or fish or any type of livestock that is shipping through the mail, it's in a blacked out box. So they don't have any sunlight. So what they do is they kind of go into a dormant stage. They more or less fall asleep. So they're consuming less oxygen. They're kind of just slowing down. Kind of like when we go to sleep, our whole body just kind of slows down. We relax. Well, as soon as you shine a bright light in there, they all wake up. They get frantic. They start swimming around like crazy, using more energy, pooping more. And so the darker you can keep it, the more relaxed they're going to be and the less chance of like a molt happening or extra stress. So if you can always wait till night to acclimate, it's always going to be better. So keep it as dark as possible. Even if you have like a black container that you can put the bag in to just slowly acclimate it to the temperature. Things like that are just going to give you that much more chance to be successful. So you know how to get your shrimp. You know how to set up the tank. You know what to look for in vendors. You know how to acclimate. Now, there's a million things I could talk about as far as maintenance, care, water changes, things like that. So feel free to ask questions. But I did want to give you a little bonus tip, and this is something that a lot of people struggle with. I know I struggled with it in the beginning. My wife, who is also into aquariums, struggled with it in the beginning. Whenever you have a death, you want to get in there. You want to see what's going on. You want to change this parameter. You want to alter this. You know, how many of us have used pH up and down, right? Like, okay, so a few people would admit to using it. I know I've used it. I've gone to the pet store and they're like, hey, your pH is too high. You need to lower it. So I use a chemical to lower it. And that stress is just so bad. So the biggest thing I want to point out is deaths happen. It's very normal for deaths to happen in the first 30 days of getting shrimp in, fish in, whatever livestock. And the worst thing you could do is go in there and start changing a bunch of stuff. If you set up the aquarium the right way the first time and you did all your research, you know you're doing it right, just stay the course. Now, if you're having mass amount of deaths, that can mean that you have a bacterial problem. There's products that you can use for that. We use Maricin. It's by Fritz again, or Mardell. It's a great product. It will neutralize any bacterial infection. And so just know that deaths happen. It's normal. Don't panic. And if you buy shrimp from us, definitely reach out to us and be like, hey, like, I had one death. Like, what do I do? Like, we're more than happy to walk you through the process, check your water parameters with you, and really take the time to really go to the next level to really help you be successful. So any questions at all from you guys? Anything that maybe I didn't touch on? So feel free to raise your hand. One question back there. I'll walk back again.
What if you have somebody starting out, they just want a little desk tank? What size do you recommend?
I always recommend more than 5 gallons because anything less than that tends to be unstable. So like the evaporation can make too big of a difference. So it's possible, but it's definitely a lot harder. So it can be done, but anything smaller than that, it just gets difficult. Any other questions? Ooh, over here. How much time do I have? Oh, perfect. Okay.
I missed part of this. Are you using RO water or tap water?
So what I always recommend is RO water and remineralizing it. It's just, you're guaranteed to have the right water every time, right? So that's what we always go with. RO water is just safer. Any other questions? Oh, you got another one. You're full of them.
If it's a shrimp only tank, how often are you doing water changes?
So what I recommend is 2 times a month. So every 2 weeks is what we recommend. Now, if you're an experienced hobbyist and you're able to monitor the parameters, you can go a lot longer than that. And vice versa. You can also go much more often than that if you're able to really match those parameters. But what we recommend is just every 2 weeks seems to be what works for us. Oh, right here.
How do you know when a shrimp is stressed?
If a shrimp is hiding, it's stressed. So shrimp that aren't stressed normally are just active. They're doing their thing. If they're swimming around the tank frantically, it could indicate stress because usually they do that when females molt. And if it's not a normal molt, then a bunch of them will molt. They'll be swimming around like crazy. So that's usually when you can tell stress. So if the shrimp are just kind of doing their thing, grazing, if they're eating, if they're not eating, you have some issues. But if they're eating, then usually they're doing pretty good. Yep.
What's your go-to fish to live with other shrimp?
Chili rasboras. Any micro rasbora is really good. Plecos are usually pretty good. Every once in a while you get one that goes rogue and starts eating a bunch of shrimp. But for the most part, plecos are good. Cories are usually pretty good, although they can't eat the babies. And then the micro rasboras are usually the best. We've used clown killies before because they're pretty small. They stay at the top of the water, so they rarely pick on the shrimp. So there's definitely some option, but if I was going to pick one, I would definitely go with the micro rasboras, which are like the chili rasbora, exclamation point, 3-spotted, mirror rasbora, things like that. Any other questions? Yep.
Your take on inbreeding?
Wait, say it again. Inbreeding. So I personally have never gotten to the point where inbreeding affects the shrimp. Now, if you're starting to have genetic deformities, and what I mean by that is like every once in a while you have a shrimp that the carapace, which is the front of the shrimp, is shorter than it's supposed to be. And so if you look at the center of its back where its body meets its tail, it's almost like sucked in and it's bare right there. So if you start getting to that point, it's usually because it's too much inbreeding. But if you got 200 shrimp, I'm going to say that you're doing pretty good. And so you probably have enough genetic diversity in there that you can just let them keep going. Well, it's crazy. Yeah, so most people I recommend starting with 10. So 5 isn't far off. I've had colonies that I started with like 3 shrimp, and then they just boomed, and then I had them for like 20 generations, and they did fine. So yeah, inbreeding, you don't see it too often. It's usually only when people are continuously taking shrimp out, letting the males breed with their daughters, and then so on and so forth, and they just continuously remove one generation and then let them go to the 3rd generation. Like, there's certainly areas where inbreeding comes into play, but if you just have a mass tank and the shrimp are just doing their thing, like, you're probably not going to run into it. Yes.
I have 2 questions. Are these slides going to be available to us? I wasn't taking notes. Okay.
So I don't know when they'll be posted, but Aquashella always posts the videos after the fact on the YouTube channel. I think it's just Aquashella. So you can get it there. If you want it, though, you can always reach out to me, rob@flipaquatics.com. You can just look up Flip Aquatics, send an email, tell them, like, hey, I saw the presentation, I want it. I can just send the presentation to you.
My second question is, my shrimp tank is overrun by snails. Your recommendation on getting rid of those snails?
That's a good one. So you can use assassin snails, and if you have plenty of snails in the tank, the assassin snails will eat the predator or the prey that's the easiest to get, which are going to be the snails. And so you can put like 10 assassin snails in there, let them eat the snails, and then after a while remove them and put them in a different tank. The other thing is snail traps. They sell a lot of snail traps online, and I know we use them specifically because we sell snails, and it's just easier to put a trap in overnight, feed it, and then pull the snails out in the morning. So there's definitely a couple ways you can do it. But there's really no fish you could use because they'd most likely eat the shrimp too. So I would say assassin snails is probably the easiest thing. And it requires less work on your end. You don't have to set up a trap or anything like that. Any other questions? Oh, right here.
How often or do you ever need to cull?
That's a great question. So calling, and just for all of you that don't know, calling is either when you take out shrimp or fish or anything that is not desirable. So like a genetic deformity, or if you're going for a certain pattern. And so calling is really up to you. And so it's, what are you going for? If you're going for like the bluest of blue shrimp, then you should take out anyone that doesn't have that characteristics. And so then you call as much as you want. But I would always take out shrimp that something's wrong with them. Now, granted, if they're missing a leg or an antenna, that always grows back. But if there's like a short carapace or something like that, then I would take it out. So it's really just dependent on that.
Yeah, I have a 20-gallon long tank. I have ram's horn snails and Malaysian snails in there. I've got some duckweed and some guppy grass. I use straight tap water, which I live in San Antonio, and the tap water is extremely hard down there. A lot of minerals in it. And so and my shrimp are doing fine. They're breeding. And
Where did you get the shrimp from?
you?
Did you? So hey, we sell hardy shrimp then. No, that's really good. And again, like I said on the slide about tap water, well water, like your water can be perfect for them based on the hardness and things like that. It's only when those like what if moments happen. Like, what if a farmer gets close to your house and spills a bunch of pesticide and it gets into your water? Or what if your tap water is getting treated because there's a bacteria bloom in the pipes? Or what if there's some corrosion and so they're treating with a pH up or down to really help with that corrosion? Or there's a pipe bursting and toxins get in there. So there's just things that could happen that could be bad. Like I had a friend, he had a fish room of, I think he had like 120 tanks, and some just happened. Some got into his water and it killed everything. Like everything died. And it was just a mass casualty. It was horrible. And so there's definitely situations where things go wrong. But for the most part, like tap water can work. Well water can work. It's just those 1% of times it's just not worth it. At least for me, like especially because we have a big business. And so like if we lost 1%, like, or that 1% time happens, like we might lose $100,000 worth of shrimp. And so we definitely go that extra mile. So especially for Carradina, it's just easier to do RO water with remineralizer. But Emma's back here. I know is there still a question over here? Okay.
So I age my water, like I condition it in water or in buckets, and then I do that. Could I do that with shrimp or?
I mean, anything can work. Again, it's just, it's just the risk that you're willing to take, right? The most expensive shrimp in the whole world, you guys aren't going to believe this, is a dead shrimp. That's the most expensive shrimp, is when you buy something and it dies. So for me, I'm always trying to prevent as much risk as possible so that if they die, I know that I did everything that I could to be successful. And so again, anything can work. Like, it could work. You can make it work. Shrimp can adjust. Fish can adjust. But it's like, do you want to guarantee yourself success? That's the question. And with RO water remineralized, you can guarantee that you're going to have success. So any other questions? I probably got time for one or two more questions. Oh, one over here. Sorry, no, you can go ahead. All right, what you got?
I don't find that my assassin snails are really killing snails. Do they need more snails to eat?
So if they're not killing your snails. So probably what they're doing is they're eating the food. So there's a chance that you might be overfeeding, and then they're just lazy. They're going for the whatever's easiest. So I would say in that case, like if you have too many snails and the assassin snails aren't eating them, purge your tank from food for like a week. Because even shrimp, like we've had shrimp go a month in the mail and come back and still be alive. So like you can go a week without feeding and really get that, the assassin snail starting to hunt down the other snails and go that way. Oh, no. Gotcha. So the only time I've ever bred assassin snails is I used, and again, like my specialty is shrimp, but I have done a little bit with assassin snails, is use like killifish spawning mops, put those in there, and then let the parameters get a little out of whack. Like don't do water change for like a month, and then they just go into breeding mode. And so it kind of like sparks. I'm like, oh no, like it's time to start breeding. But putting the spawning mops in there will definitely help them. That definitely triggers them to start breeding. Oh, yeah, fish in there too. How about this? How about you send me an email, and that will give me some more time to think about your unique situation and give you a better answer. So you can reach out to flipaquatics.com and just message our customer service, and they'll direct it to me, and I'm more than happy to help you. So time for one more question. Anybody got one? Oh, way in the back, man. You guys are, if I wasn't sweating before, I'm sweating now. Although it is hotter up on the stage for whatever reason. It's got to be the bright lights.
Yeah, might be a little bit off topic, but somehow I got some Malaysian trumpet snails in my tank. And now I've put some Asian in there to try to decrease the population for those Malaysian trumpets.
What'd you put in there? Asian snails. Oh, assassin snails. Assassin snails. So the only other recommendation that I have for reducing like Malaysian trumpet snail population, there's chemicals you could use. Like there's a product called, what's the name of it? It's called Panicure C. It's a dog dewormer, and we use it to treat parasites when shrimp come in from overseas. And you can actually use that to kill snails, and it won't affect anything besides like snails or worms or things like that. And so if you have other snails in the tank that you want, I would remove those. But again, that's kind of a unique situation. So feel free to email me, and I'm more than happy to kind of give you some more guidance with that. So, all right, guys. Oh, one more question.
Would that be the planaria?
Yeah, that's what I use for planaria too. So basically anything that has like a slime coat, it's going to target. I don't think it's ever killed like cories for us. Yeah, that's what we use, dog dewormer. It's called Panicure C. So, all right, well, thank you all for being patient. Thank you for all the questions. It's always good when there's lots of questions. It means that, people were interested. So I really appreciate your guys' time. Again, it's always fun to stand up here besides the temperature and share my hobby and my passion with you guys. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the show.